In medieval times, some weapons chop, and other types of medieval weapons can chop, slash, and thrust. Some of them can stab at really close range, some can stab at much longer range, and some medieval weapons just smash. And some of those weapons can do all of those things, but there's one type of really important attack or tactic which is often overlooked in historical combat techniques: hooking. So let's have a quick look at hooking with different medieval weapons. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. So hooking is actually incredibly important for some reasons we're going to consider in this video. And one of the probably earliest weapons which was used for hooking was the axe. The axe has been around obviously since prehistory, with stone-headed forms, then bronze-headed forms, and obviously eventually with iron and steel-headed forms. Now, the reason that the hooking of the axe is so important, I would say particularly, is because throughout all of these early periods, perhaps maybe not so much prehistory, although probably to some extent, one very, very important thing that was kind of, you could say, omnipresent in all primitive combat was shields. Okay, now any society really that develops things like bows and spears and indeed axes at some point is going to invent shields, and certainly once we start to get into coordinated massed warfare, shields become massively important, and they're the most obvious way of nullifying the devastating effect of arrows and thrown spears. If you've got people shooting arrows around and throwing spears around, at some point they're going to invent the shield because that's the best way to deal with those projectiles. Now, if lots of people have got shields and let's say swords have been invented, if lots of people have got shields and lots of people have got swords, swords are fantastic weapons and they have all sorts of advantages to them. They're quick, they're pretty nimble because of the way they're balanced, but also you can cut with a very long edge and they've got a thrusting point as well. And obviously there are techniques for getting around shields with a sword. But the one massive advantage that something like an axe has in a context where loads of people have got shields is that it can pull the edge of the shield, and it can pull it from the top, it can pull it from the side, and that creates openings. Now this is of course very useful in single one-on-one combat, and anybody who's done any kind of reenactment or HEMA or anything else, perhaps even Filipino martial arts, where shields are sometimes used, you will find that any weapon which is able to hook is really, really useful against shields. And obviously not only for the individual, but also in massed combat, because it can create openings in the shield line. So being able to hook the shield open enables your person standing next to you, perhaps with a spear or a sword, to thrust into the opening that you created. Now if we go into the Viking era, we start to see these massive two-handed axes, and as I've dealt with in previous videos looking at the so-called Dane axe or great axe here, one of the advantages of this, particularly in an age where the shield wall is a big thing, shield formations are a thing, is if you have a few people with these big axes, not only can they strike over the top of the shield wall and hit people behind, but additionally they can use these weapons as hooks against the shields to create openings for those spears. And remember, most people are armed with spears at this time, so creating openings, incredibly important, hooking with an axe. But here's the thing, it's not only against shields. If we look at tomahawks and smaller axes, sometimes used in a context, in an environment where there aren't shields or aren't so many shields, hooking is still a useful thing, because you can hook limbs, you can hook arms, you can hook behind someone's head, you can hook behind their knee. We'll look a bit more at this in a second. So hooking can be also used against the person's body, not just the shield, and indeed in some cases it can be used against the weapon as well. For example, if one of those common opponents who carries a spear is against you and the spear is thrusting in, not only can you block with the axe, but having blocked, when you pull down, it forms a hooking motion on the spear, which gives you an additional point of control. And this could of course be applied to any other weapon, even another axe to some extent. So hooking not just against shields, but also against other weapons, and indeed against parts of the opponent's body. Now as we go into the late medieval period, we have a very specialised form of axe known as the poleaxe, something which features a lot on this channel because I love poleaxes, they're one of my favourite weapons. And indeed hooking is a major component of poleaxe fighting. It's used an awful lot, and to some extent you could say the hooking in some cases might be an even more important type of attack than hitting with the hammer or spike or whatever. So this is used in a number of ways in poleaxe treatises. One way is to hook the person, as I mentioned, and one of the common targets for that is actually around the back of the person's knee. Now in armour, that's even more effective. I'll show you why. Well, in armour, you're invulnerable to standard cuts and so on and so forth, but the armour is designed in such a way to protect the tendons at the back of the knee with this wing. Now, one of the beautiful things is having this wing here gives something to hook against. So actually, when you're fighting an armoured opponent in armour with this type of protection, they're protected against a direct strike to the side or back of the knee, or at least they're protected against kind of easily being wounded there by this armour. But it does mean that that hook of that poleaxe, the bottom edge of the blade, can really get in behind the knee armour. And this doesn't just apply for knees, it can also apply to other parts of the armour as well. For example, the inside of the elbows, the kelters as they're called, or the back of the helmet, for example, or even the back of the pauldrons, the shoulder armour. So one of the reasons that poleaxe heads are sometimes shaped like this is not necessarily to do with chopping. You might just think of an axe as a chopping thing, but because that is a really important hooking device. And sometimes we have a spike at the back instead of a hammer. The hammer can be used for hooking as well, but the spike being longer is usually easier to do that with. But we don't only hook parts of the person's body on their armour, but we also hook the actual poleaxe itself. So when one axe hooks onto the other one, you can attempt to pull it out of the person's hands. So a very typical technique, for example, is you set in a swing towards the person's head, they do a block, you pull back, hoping to wrench the poleaxe out of their hands, and even if you fail, what you've now done is bring your point online to thrust. So the hook in this case is achieving several goals. You're threatening with the strike, which they have to parry, unless they want to just be hit in the head. So they parry it, at which point you pull backwards, which might disarm them, but even if it doesn't disarm them, you created an opening for the thrust at the face. So you can hook the person's body, you can hook their axe. Now, related to that, we've got another type of medieval weapon here called a bill or bill hook. Now this comes from an agricultural tool originally for chopping limbs and branches off hedges, sometimes known as a hedging bill. You can still buy them in DIY stores, but it has the addition of a top spike to make it a more effective weapon and a back spike, which admittedly some of the tools actually have anyway. But nevertheless, this has a hook element to it. So yes, absolutely, you can swing and chop with this thing like a halberd, but the fact that it's got that hook there means you can use it in a lot of the similar ways to how you would use a poleaxe, so against the person's weapon, against the person's body. But in addition to that, the poleaxe and the bill are very effective against enemy horsemen, people on horseback, because you're now able to pull the person off the horse, or at least unbalance them, or indeed to hook the horse itself. And this is somewhat horrible for horse lovers, but nevertheless, that is a very horrible weapon which can be used against the horse, the back of its neck, around its legs, or indeed against the equipment, for example, the reins or other parts of the tack which are attached to the horse. So that hooking onto things, even the stirrups in some cases, hooking onto things can enable you to really mess with an enemy horseman. Now, staying on the theme of horsemanship and horsemen for a second, one of the other weapons which often gets looked at on channels like mine is the Warhammer, and people inevitably think about the Warhammer as a swinging and smashing thing or a spiky penetrating thing against armour. But actually this is also a hook, and in fact there are forms of this where they really exaggerate the length of the beak or spike there, the hook, in order to literally hook onto parts of the opponent. And of course we do have horsemen's axes which are like this as well, and with these we can hook with either side, because you can hook with the axe blade or you can hook with the spike, and obviously you can strike with these things as well. But on horseback, a really useful technique which is well documented is to smash your either blade or hammer or hook into anywhere really, and hope that it catches. And when it catches, when you feel that bite, you're not really thinking so much about getting through armour, because that's not going to happen very often. But if it gets caught somewhere, one of the most effective things you can do is then using your horsemanship, steer your horse away and pull. And in fact, techniques like this are even detailed in Fiore de Liberi with a sword. We'll come on to swords in a second. So hooking the opponent and then riding away, what happens? Hopefully they come off off the horse, or in some cases they and the horse get pulled over, which obviously takes them out of the combat potentially, but also makes them very vulnerable to your comrades who are on foot with their billhooks or their poleaxes who can finish them off. So far we've been looking at hooking with weapons which have a natural transverse element to them, whether it's a spike or a hook on one side or a blade or a hammer. This means that you have a right angle, or in some case a T-shape, and that is a natural pulling device, whether it's on the person's armour, on their body, on the horse, on some element of the equipment, or indeed on the opponent's weapon. But one family of weapons, or should we say two families of weapons actually, that people wouldn't necessarily immediately think of as being capable of hooking are swords and daggers. Well, here I've got a massive two-handed sword, sometimes known as a Zweihander on the internet, probably known as other names actually historically. But anyway, let's call it a two-handed sword, which is what it was called in English. And this is a master sword, and usually obviously you're going to be, I don't have enough space to swing it around in here, but you're going to be giving big blows and obviously sometimes thrusts and so on and so forth. But there are a couple of ways, in fact there's 3 ways, that you can actually hook with this, and it was used for hooking. So if we go into half swording, that is, we bring the left hand up from the back of the hilt or by the pommel, we bring it up to the middle of the blade. Now, and this is how we conventionally fight most of the time, not all, but most of the time, with a sword in armour, because this gives us now a stiffer thrusting point, it gives us greater control and leverage, and it's more accurate as well, and you can use it as a wrestling aid. Now, there we go, as a wrestling aid, there's the spoiler. So this now becomes a giant hooking or levering device, because the top end can be now used, for example, if I've got my foot behind someone's leg, to hook that way to throw them over my knee, or indeed if I get the pommel and put my other leg, my right leg behind their leg, and then I can hook with the pommel end. So using this as a giant lever is one way in which we can hook people. Another way, which doesn't get that much coverage, is actually, and this is done with poleaxe as well, if we put the middle behind their head and then run backwards, you pull them on their face. This is something we occasionally see done in modern bowhurt fighting incidentally. It's a very effective technique if your aim is to put the opponent on the ground on their face in armour. It works particularly well in armour because you're top heavy in armour. So hooking with the pointy end, hooking with the pommel end, or indeed hooking and pulling like with a bar, almost like a clothesline, over the back of the head like this, are 3 hooking ways. But there is another way you can hook with the sword. I've grabbed a Langmesser for this, so that's a type of long knife as it translates from German. So this is a type of short sword, however this can be done with any one-handed sword. Now this is if our blades have crossed here, if we rotate our hilt over the back of the person's wrist, we can actually hook with the back of the sword here. Now this can be done with other types of sword. It can be done with conventional arming swords or hangers, or even sabres and shamshirs and things like that with this as well. However, we find it particularly in the Langmesser sources from the 15th and 16th centuries, because we have a slightly overlong grip. So we have some extended grip here, which gives us that extra kind of extension that we can actually get over behind this person's wrist. But as I mentioned, this can be done with arming swords, and in fact this exact technique is exactly shown with arming swords, or with bastard swords perhaps, in Fiore's treatise, both on foot and on horseback. Now interestingly, on horseback, you remember the technique I mentioned with the Warhammer where we get the hook on and then we ride away to pull them off the side of their horse? Well, this is exactly shown with this. So a person comes in, you ride towards them, they take a swing at your head, you cross it with your blade, and then as you go past, you hook the back of here behind their wrist, and then you ride your horse off in that direction, pulling them off the side of their saddle as you go. So we can hook with that as well. But there is yet one other way that you can hook with a sword. So we've looked with hooking with the pointy end, hooking with the pommel end, hooking with the middle, and we've looked at one-handed swords as well. But here, we're actually going to turn the sword around. So we talked about the fact that we don't have the projection sticking out like we do with an axe or a warhammer, unless we turn it around. And so there is something called a Mordhau or Mordschlag, which is essentially hitting with the with the hilt end really of the sword. Now this is usually done where you're in armor, where the opponent's in armor, and you're just trying to basically hit the person in the head really hard. You can either use the crossguard to hit as if it was a Warhammer, or you can use the pommel to hit like it was a mace. But here's the thing, there is a well-known technique, at least well-known to those of us who do HEMA, whereby you swing with this end and the people block it, at which point you pull and then you go here. So it's exactly the same as the Poleaxe technique. And in this case, what we're essentially doing is we're taking the big sword, we're turning it around, and we're using it like a poleaxe. And the final example you might not have thought of. Let me know down in the comments down below, did you think of this before I got to it? The dagger. So most people think of a dagger as a stabbing implement, whether it's stabbing normal grip like that or ice pick grip like that. But a lot of people note that medieval sources actually, contrary to the modern world use of knives, actually favour the ice pick grip. Not to say they don't do this as well, they do, but the ice pick grip is actually more common statistically. It's maybe like 70% this way. Now, one of the advantages of this, maybe we'll look more at the ice pick grip in general in medieval sources because it's a massive topic, but one of the advantages of doing this, you will have already realised, is hooking. So as well as obviously being able to stab, what you can actually do with this is hook. So a very common technique is if someone is swinging in either with a stab with their own dagger, or they're swinging in with a sword or something like this, we actually take our ice pick grip, we invert it that way, okay? So we stick it point upwards, and then we come from below, underneath, and hook. And from here we can get into a position to armbar, we can just knock the thing aside. Indeed, there are techniques where we come down with the hook and hook behind the person's leg, behind their head, all this kind of stuff. So, without going into too much more detail on it, this can be used in the ice pick grip as a hook, and indeed in some cases even with the normal grip it can be used as a hook as well, but the ice pick grip is particularly well suited to it. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up there, but let me know in the comments down below, can you think of some other hooking done with medieval weapons that I didn't cover here? Did I forget something? Or would you like me to cover any of this in more depth, any of these particular elements? For example, the ice pick grip in dagger, in medieval dagger treatises, which I think is something that we need to turn some more attention to, because I haven't done daggers for quite a long time and they're a massive and very interesting topic. Anyway, I have been Matt Easton. I will of course continue to be. Make sure you're subscribed and I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Cheers folks. Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers folks.